Canberra, and we'll bring in the ANU Professor Peter Collignon. He's an infectious diseases expert. Peter, good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. What do you make of this recovery?
Well, if he's done that, he's recovered reasonably quickly, although there's not really good evidence that he was ever very sick. While his oxygen levels may have been down mildly, you're really not in trouble until they get below 90% saturation. And so I'm not sure there's good evidence that he was very sick. He did actually have a fever, from what I can see from the media. His oxygen levels were down a little bit. He may or may not have had an abnormal lung scan. I haven't actually seen the picture or report, but a lot of people with COVID get what we call mild disease. And while they may have abnormalities, including abnormals on abnormal x-rays, they don't get all that sick and they recover. So the fact that he hasn't got all that sick, at least as far as I can tell over the last week, is probably a good sign. But I think you have to wait a week or two. I mean, This is a disease that can progress over even 2 weeks. So I'd feel more confident that he's on a road to recovery if he's still in reasonable health a week from now.
Well, we're playing pictures, all these pictures, these new pictures that have just come in now, Peter. It's definitely him in the motorcade. He's got the mask on his face and he's waving to the crowds. I'm not sure where he's heading after that. But regardless, I mean, we saw what happened with Boris Johnson, right? So he got the disease, and then he didn't get really crook until 3 or 4 days after that. We're still only about that from when Donald Trump announced that he had the disease. So could it be that the worst is still to come?
Well, yes, I think it could be. I mean, Boris Johnson is a good example. He had a lot of, look, I'm fine, but then he looked a little bit seedy, and then he was in hospital 1 or 2 days later. So, look, I actually think you have to wait another week or even 2 weeks before you really know. I mean, if Donald Trump is still well in a week's time to 10 days' time, I'd say, look, he's probably over it, because that's usually the course. But I think it's a little bit early to get too optimistic at this stage, although the majority of people, even in their 70s, who do get it, can have either mild disease or asymptomatic disease. It's just by the time you're 70, you've probably got a 2% mortality if you get this. But it also, your underlying conditions are also a factor, one of which is being overweight, I might say, but particularly if you've got heart disease, diabetes, etc., that makes your risk higher for both getting more complications and also dying from it.
And what do you make of this drug cocktail that he had been on to treat the virus, Peter? It's monoclonal antibodies made by Regeneron. I don't know what that means, but can you elaborate on what it is and what it does?
Well, what it is a form of antibodies made by laboratory methods, and that's why they're called monoclonal. They're just one type of antibody or one specific antibody. But antibodies we do use, they're what we produce ourselves when we're fighting infections. Our white cells get turned on and try and kill the virus, but we also manufacture antibodies from other white cells that bind with the virus and can help kill it as well. So there's been some studies that suggest that if you give people what we call plasma, which is the fluid in your blood that contains antibodies, that may help people. So what they've done here is, with really preliminary data, said, look, there's some data that suggests this might help, and we'll give it to you. But it is experimental. There's only about 300 people, I think, so far have been given this particular company's brand of antibodies, and they've done reasonably well. But it was mild disease, and it just showed their viral level went down. It didn't actually necessarily show they did better. And that's one of the problems when you're president, perversely. You'll get all the drugs or all the cocktails that look like they might be good because, people think you're important and they'll give you these experimental ones. But the trouble with any experimental therapy, in the short term, they look like they're okay. But a lot of times we take these drugs, they either have no effect or sometimes they even do harm. So you've got to be a little bit careful. Perversely, if you're VIP, you may not necessarily get the best standard therapy.
All right. Just if I can pivot topics, just finally, Peter, our political editor, Andrew Clennell, spoke to Treasurer Josh Frydenberg yesterday. This is all about the budget coming down tomorrow. And a lot of it is based on the fact that we may have a vaccine, or they believe that we will have a vaccine at the start of next year. So a lot of the numbers are based on that. I've just got a clip of that interview to play you.
We have factored in those issues related to the vaccine, and again that will be available on budget night. As you know, we have worked hard with international counterparts to secure the vaccine for Australia.
But does the budget assume a vaccine will become available?
The budget takes into account the possibility that is the case.
Peter, are you as confident?
Well, I'm confident we might have a vaccine next year. I don't know about early next year. I think halfway through might be more realistic because the phase 3 studies won't even really be finished before the end of this year. And then, depending on how they go, you've got to manufacture and distribute it. So I think we might have a vaccine halfway through next year, maybe the end of next year. But there's also an issue about how effective it is. If we really want to have a big effect on this disease, it's got to be 90% effective. Now, I don't think that's all that likely by early next year. If we have something that's 30% effective or 50% effective, that's a bit like influenza. You can make a difference to death, but it doesn't make all that much difference to spread. And that's a really important issue because international travel, local travel is all to do with how much spread there is. So I would be less confident that we'll have something next year of high efficacy that will affect spread and will allow us to get back to 2019 levels of activity. I think we've got restrictions and decreased movement, particularly internationally, but even crowds being limited for some time to come, at least another year and maybe longer, because this virus is not going to go away anytime soon.
It seems really risky to be basing so many big numbers on a vaccine possibly being available by the start of next year, when all the expert advice, including from yourself, suggests that it's not going to be anywhere near that.
Well, I'll leave it to the economists to make the money predictions, but my view is we're going to have to live with COVID-type restrictions and rules for at least another 12 months, and I suspect even longer, until we either get a large amount of people who've got the infection, which is a bad idea because so many people die, or we come up with a vaccine that has got very good efficacy and we actually find better ways of stopping spread, particularly during super spreader events, high numbers of people indoors, particularly with alcohols involved.
Sure. All right.